Tessa Rowan was a woman whose life was measured in vitals and overtime. Her only goal was to navigate the grueling path to her surgical residency with her ethics and her bank account intact. But on a frigid night at St. Jude's Hospital, she found a wallet, a sleek piece of leather packed with enough cash to bury her debts and save her brother's life. The owner was Roman Kade, a man whose power carved out the shadows of the city. What Tessa didn't know as she gripped that cold hospital phone was that she hadn't just found a lost item, she had stumbled into a deliberate, high-stakes test. Returning the wallet was the right thing to do, but it was also the first irreversible step into a world ruled by a terrifying boss who only rewards those he can leash. Tessa was an anchor in a sea of sterile chaos. At 26, she balanced the life-and-death intensity of the oncology ward with the crushing financial weight of her brother Oliver's rehabilitation. She was practical, focused, and knew the value of $1, usually the hard-earned kind taxed out of a double shift. Her hair, caught in a neat, professional bun, seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent glare of the ward, and her steady hands were a welcome contrast to the hospital's frantic pace. She was driven by an uncompromising vision, a scalpel in her hand, a future where her brother walked again, and a world where she didn't have to choose between rent and medicine. That dream was her North Star, but the path to it was a long, exhausting march through maximum effort and minimum sleep. It was 3 a.m., and the Discharged lounge was a ghost town. Tessa was peeling off her surgical mask, her mind running through the chemotherapy dosages she needed to chart before her shift finally ended. Her feet throbbed a familiar, dull complaint against the linoleum. She glanced toward the last chair in the corner, seat number 4, observing the space recently occupied by the man who had been the night's most unusual patient. He had been a study in controlled intensity. Dressed in a black three-piece suit that seemed like armor, he possessed a stark, sculpted look, with dark hair swept back and heavy tattoos creeping up a neck that seemed made of iron. Roman Kade's presence had been a singular, heavy weight in the usually clinical atmosphere of St. Jude's. He had arrived with a security detail that dwarfed the hospital's regular staff, remained perfectly calm while a nurse stitched a jagged wound, and left without a word, his movements precise and silent. He was the kind of man who left a wake of stillness, not noise. As Tessa began clearing the side table, her hands swept over the cold plastic chair. Her fingers brushed against something solid and smooth, nestled deep in the crevice of the seat. It was a wallet. It was a cardholder made of rich, glossy leather, so dark it was almost black, and it felt heavy, substantial, and subtly expensive. The quality was unmistakable, the kind of item designed to last a lifetime, a stark contrast to the sterile, disposable world it rested upon. A wave of profound unease washed over her. The gravity of the object felt disproportionate to the hospital setting. It was a piece of a life that did not belong anywhere near the scent of antiseptic and cheap coffee. She stepped into the shadows of the hallway and opened it carefully. Inside, there wasn't a riot of receipts or clutter. There were thick bundles of crisp, sequential $100 bills held neatly by a silver clip. Next to the money was a singular, heavy obsidian card with an engraved crest she didn't recognize. No bank name. No logo. Just a private, powerful, and likely dangerous signature of wealth. The temptation was immediate and sharp. $6,000. Tessa let the weight of that number settle on her. It was the solution to every stress. But her mentor, Clara, had always told her that some gifts come with a ghost. Tessa closed the wallet with a firm snap. She had to return it, unaware that her honesty was the very bait Roman Kade had been waiting for. If this story pulled you in for even a second, kindly support me with likes, comments and also subscribe. It means the world to me. Tessa Rowan's world was a rhythmic cycle of beeping monitors, the smell of sterile latex, and the persistent, heavy ache in her lower back. As the clock in the oncology ward ticked toward 2:30 a.m., she felt the familiar haze of a double shift settling over her vision like a thin veil of frost. Her life was a meticulous calculation of vitals and overtime, a desperate sprint to stay ahead of the mounting bills for her brother Oliver's specialized care and her own looming tuition. Every patient she helped was a step toward her dream of becoming a surgeon, but tonight, the dream felt miles away, buried under the weight of sheer physical exhaustion. The atmosphere in the hospital changed before she even saw him. It wasn't a sound, but a sudden, dense pressure in the air, chilling aura that seemed to suck the warmth out of the hallway. Roman Kade was being discharged. He didn't leave like a normal patient, he moved like a king vacating a conquered territory. Tessa watched from the nurse's station as he stepped out of the private suite, flanked by a security detail that made the hospital's regular staff look like amateurs. Roman was a study in terrifying, controlled intensity. Even in the sterile hospital lighting, he looked remarkably out of place, dressed in a black three-piece suit that fit him like a second skin. Dark hair was swept back from a face that looked as though it had been carved from cold marble, and heavy tattoos climbed his neck, disappearing beneath a crisp white collar. He had been treated for a jagged laceration, a wound that would have had most men groaning in pain, yet he hadn't made a single sound during the procedure. As he walked toward the exit, his gaze swept the corridor. For a split second, his eyes met Tessa's. They were dark, piercing, and entirely unreadable, radiating a palpable intensity that made her breath hitch in her throat. He didn't nod or acknowledge her presence, he simply moved past, a silent predator in a world of prey. His movements were precise, lacking any of the typical post-discharge lethargy. He left behind a wake of absolute stillness, a vacuum where the hospital's usual hum seemed to die. Tessa waited until the heavy glass doors hissed shut behind him and his entourage before she allowed herself to exhale. She walked toward the discharge lounge, her mind already drifting back to the medical charts she needed to finalize. The room was empty, the air still carrying a faint, lingering scent of his cologne, something woodsy, sharp, and undeniably expensive. She reached for a discarded towel on the side table near seat number 4, the very chair where Roman had sat waiting for his final paperwork. Her hand paused. There, nestled deep in the shadow of the seat cushion, lay a sliver of dark, polished leather. It was his wallet, heavy and substantial, a piece of a dangerous world left behind in her own. The weight of the wallet in Tessa's hand was disproportionate to its size, a dense anchor of burgundy leather that felt like it carried the gravity of another world. She retreated to a shadowed corner of the discharge lounge, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. With trembling fingers, she flicked the silver clasp open, her breath catching as she glimpsed the interior. There was no clutter, no faded grocery receipts or family photos. Instead, she found 2 thick, clinical bundles of crisp, sequential $100 bills held firmly by a high-end money clip. She did a quick, silent count, her medical mind calculating with the same precision she used for dosages. $6,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. To anyone else, it was a luxury. To Tessa, it was the exact price of the specialized neurological rehabilitation her brother, Oliver, so desperately needed, a treatment the insurance company had dismissed as experimental months ago. She stared at the money, and for a fleeting, silver-lined moment, she saw a different life. She saw Oliver standing without braces, the crushing weight of her student loans vanishing, and the end of the grueling double shifts that left her soul feeling as frayed as her scrubs. The future she had been marching toward with maximum effort and minimum wage was suddenly sitting in the palm of her hand. But as she looked at the ID card, the impassive, dark eyes of Roman Kade stared back at her from the laminate, radiating an almost palpable intensity that made her skin prickle. Beside his name sat a heavy obsidian card etched with a symbol that suggested membership in a world far removed from the public wards of St. Jude's. This wasn't just lost cash, it was a piece of a dangerous machine. The voice of her mentor, Clara, echoed in her mind, sharper than the hospital's intercom. There is no peace in stolen comfort. Tessa knew that keeping this wouldn't just be a theft, it would be an invitation for the shadows to follow her home. The temptation was a sharp, jagged edge, but her integrity was the only thing she had left that wasn't for sale. Her hand shook as she reached for her phone, the choice already made even as her bank balance screamed in protest. She couldn't keep the money, but she also couldn't shake the terrifying premonition that by returning it, she was stepping into a test she wasn't prepared to fail. The digital clock on the wall of the nurse's station flickered to 3:15 a.m., its red glow bleeding into the dim hallway like an open wound. Tessa stood by the desk, her fingers hovering over the keypad of the hospital's landline. In her other hand, she gripped the heavy obsidian card she had pulled from the wallet. There was no name on the card, only a series of digits embossed in a cold, metallic font and that strange, haunting crest. Every instinct she possessed, honed by years of navigating high-stakes trauma, told her to walk away, to drop the wallet at the lost and found and let it be someone else's mystery. But the image of Roman Kade's piercing, unreadable eyes remained burned into her mind, and she knew that for a man like him, lost was a relative term. She dialed the number. The line didn't ring, it simply clicked open, transitioning into a silence so profound it felt heavy. "I found something," Tessa whispered, her voice cracking slightly in the hollow quiet of the station. "A wallet. At St. Jude's. It belongs to Roman Kade." There was a beat of predatory stillness on the other end. Then, a voice responded, not the smooth, controlled baritone of the man she had seen, but a voice like grinding stones, low and dangerously devoid of emotion. This was Victor, a man whose very tone suggested he dealt in ultimates. "Describe the contents," the voice commanded. $6,000. Sequential bills. "An obsidian card with a crest," Tessa replied, her grip tightening on the receiver. "Listen carefully, Nurse Rowan," Victor said, and the fact that he already knew her name sent a surge of cold adrenaline through her veins. "You will stay exactly where you are. Do not leave the station. Do not put that wallet in a locker or hand it to security. If you move, if you hang up, or if a single bill is missing when we arrive, the consequences will be permanent. Do you understand?" Tessa's breath hitched. The plastic of the phone suddenly felt like a burning coal against her ear, a direct conduit to a world of violence she had only ever seen the aftermath of in the ER. She was no longer just a nurse finishing a shift, she was a witness, a keeper of a secret that carried the weight of a death sentence. "I understand," she managed to say, her eyes darting to the sliding glass doors of the main entrance. 5 minutes, Victor clipped, and the line went dead. The silence that followed was worse than the voice. Tessa sat frozen, the hum of the vending machine down the hall sounding like a roar in the vacuum. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had spent the night healing, and realized they were shaking. She was tucked into the warm, fluorescent safety of the hospital, yet she felt as though she were standing on the edge of a vast, dark ocean, waiting for the tide to pull her under. The 5 minutes passed with a stretching, agonizing slowness that made the hospital's ambient sounds, the distant hum of a floor polisher, the hiss of the automatic doors, sound like a countdown. Tessa stood behind the nurse's station, the burgundy leather wallet resting on the counter like a live grenade. Then, a sleek, charcoal black SUV with windows so dark they looked like ink slid into the ambulance bay, ignoring the emergency-only signs with a quiet, idling arrogance. The man who stepped out was not the one she had seen in the lounge. This was Enzo. He was younger, with sharp, bird-of-prey features and a suit that cost more than Tessa's car, but he carried the same heavy stillness that seemed to be a requirement for Roman Kade's inner circle. He didn't rush. He walked through the sliding glass doors with a rhythmic, predatory grace, his eyes scanning the lobby before locking onto Tessa. The air in the station grew cold as he approached. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply stopped at the counter and held out a hand, his palm calloused and steady. Tessa pushed the wallet toward him. He picked it up, flicking it open with a single, practiced motion of his thumb. He didn't count the money, he simply glanced at the obsidian card, ensuring it was untouched. "You have a rare talent, Nurse Rowan," Enzo said, his voice a smooth, dangerous silk. "Most people in this city have a price. You didn't even check to see if we were watching." "I just wanted to return what didn't belong to me," Tessa replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Enzo reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a thick, heavy manila envelope. He placed it on the counter where the wallet had been, sliding it toward her with a look of clinical amusement. "Mr. Kade doesn't believe in belonging. He believes in value," Enzo stated. "He calls this a manila envelope of gratitude. It's a down payment on a future you didn't know you had. Consider it a reward for passing the first gate." Before Tessa could protest or ask what he meant by the first gate, Enzo turned on his heel. He vanished back into the night as quickly as he had appeared, the SUV pulling away with a low, guttural growl that echoed in the empty bay. Tessa looked down at the envelope. It was unsealed. She tipped it slightly, and her heart nearly stopped. It wasn't just a thank you note. Inside was a stack of $5,000 and a business card with a single, handwritten word on the back, "Soon." The money felt heavy, tainted, and entirely necessary, a golden leash that had just been clipped to her collar. For the next 2 weeks, the manila envelope sat hidden in the back of Tessa's freezer, tucked behind a bag of frozen peas, but its presence radiated through the apartment like a radioactive isotope. Every time she opened the door for a glass of water, she felt the chill of that gratitude seep into her bones. $5,000. It was enough to cover 3 months of Oliver's specialized physical therapy and finally quiet the collection agencies hounding her for her last semester's tuition. Yet, the money felt too hot to spend, a collection of paper ghosts that didn't belong to the world of nursing scrubs and subway passes. Tessa tried to submerge herself in the familiar, sterile rhythm of St. Jude's, but the hospital no longer felt like a sanctuary. The mundane sounds of the ward, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the distant chime of a call button, now carried a jagged edge of suspicion. She found herself scanning the faces in the lobby, wondering if the man reading a newspaper in the corner was actually interested in the headlines or if he was cataloging the exact time she clocked in. Every charcoal-colored SUV she saw in traffic made her heart skip a beat, her mind instantly conjuring the image of Enzo's predatory smile and the obsidian card. Her mentor, Clara, noticed the change. "You're vibrating, Tessa," she had said during a rare quiet moment in the break room. "You look like a woman waiting for a storm to break." Tessa had merely offered a tired smile and blamed it on the double shifts, but the lie tasted like copper in her mouth. She couldn't tell Clara that she felt like a specimen under a microscope, or that she had begun to notice the same black sedan parked 2 blocks from her apartment every evening at 6 p.m. The paranoia was a gift that kept on giving, sharpening her senses until she was raw. She found herself double-checking every dosage, every chart, every lock on her door, possessed by the terrifying realization that she had been vetted and found useful. Roman Kade hadn't just given her a reward, he had given her a tether. She was no longer an anonymous face in a city of millions, she was a variable in his private equation. One rainy Tuesday, while walking to the library, she found a small, unmarked box on her doorstep. Inside was a new smartphone, its screen already lit with a single message from an unsaved number: "Rest well, Nurse Rowan. You have a long night ahead." She didn't call the police. She didn't throw it away. She simply stared at the device, realizing with a sinking heart that the first gate was officially behind her, and the walls of her normal life were beginning to dissolve into the shadows. The hospital at 4 a.m. was a sanctuary of hushed tones and rhythmic breathing, the kind of stillness that usually allowed Tessa a moment of professional clarity. But as she stood at the medication cart, the air suddenly grew heavy, the temperature in the ward dropping with the arrival of a presence she had come to recognize in her nightmares. She didn't have to turn around to know that Roman Kade had returned. He moved through the ward not as a patient, but as the owner of the space, his black suit blending into the dim shadows of the corridor. He didn't have his security detail with him this time, he didn't need them. His own intensity was enough to keep the world at a distance. He stopped beside her, leaning against the counter with a casual, predatory grace that made the sterile ward feel like a cage. "You haven't spent the money, Nurse Rowan," he said, his voice a low, velvety baritone that vibrated in the small space between them. It wasn't a question. Tessa kept her eyes on the vial she was prepping, though her hands felt cold. "It's sitting in my freezer. I don't take payment for basic human decency." Roman let out a short, mirthless huff that might have been a laugh. He reached out, his hand, large, scarred, and decorated with heavy tattoos, resting just inches from hers. "Decency is a luxury for people who can afford it. You have a brother who needs a future and a career that is currently buried under 6 figures of debt. I'm not offering you a tip, Tessa. I'm offering you an exit." He leaned closer, the scent of woodsy cologne and expensive tobacco overriding the hospital's pervasive smell of antiseptic. "I have a need for someone with your specific combination of steady hands and a stubborn conscience. Someone who can operate in the dark and keep their mouth shut when the world gets messy. I am offering to wipe the slate clean. Every cent you owe, every bill your brother faces, gone by sunrise." Tessa finally looked at him, her heart thundering. "And what do you get in return?" "Unwavering loyalty," Roman stated, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying, absolute focus. "And absolute silence. I am buying your future so that it belongs to me. You will continue your studies, you will become the surgeon you were meant to be, but when I call, you answer. No questions. No hesitation." The weight of the offer was immense, a golden hammer ready to shatter the glass ceiling of her poverty. But as she stared into the abyss of his gaze, she realized the price wasn't just her silence, it was her soul. "Think about it," Roman whispered, straightening up as the distant sound of a nurse's footsteps approached. "But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait for the sun to rise." He vanished into the shadows of the exit, leaving Tessa standing in the fluorescent glare, the choice already feeling like a weight she was destined to carry. The transition from the world of sterile white tiles to the cold reality of the Kade organization happened not with a handshake, but with the weight of a single piece of hardware. 3 days after their encounter in the ward, the debt collection calls stopped. When Tessa logged into her student portal, the balance was a startling, clean 0. The rehabilitation center called to inform her that Oliver had been moved to the executive wing, his care paid for in full through a private endowment. The price of her soul had been calculated, and Roman Kade had paid it without blinking. The following night, the black sedan was waiting at the end of her block. This time, the door opened before she reached it. Enzo sat in the back, his expression as unreadable as the tinted glass. On the leather seat between them lay a small, heavy box. "Mr. Kade values efficiency," Enzo said, his voice cutting through the hum of the climate control. This phone is your only point of contact. It is encrypted, untraceable, and your new shadow. If it rings, you answer. If it pings, you move. You are now part of a ghost network, Nurse Rowan. You don't exist in our books, but our books don't exist without you. Tessa reached out, her fingers brushing the cool, matte surface of the flip phone. It felt heavier than it looked, a physical manifestation of the blood contract she was signing. By picking it up, she was agreeing to a life of dualities, a dedicated nurse by day, and a hidden asset for the city's most dangerous men by night. She thought of Oliver, of his hands finally steady enough to hold a glass, and her own future, once a flickering candle, now a bright, albeit stolen, flame. "What about my ethics?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread in the dark interior of the car. Enzo looked at her, a flash of something like pity crossing his sharp features. "Ethics are for people who can afford the consequences of being right. You chose the consequence of being loyal. There's no going back once you flip that open." With a trembling hand, Tessa picked up the device. She felt the click as it settled into her palm, the final lock on her previous life snapping shut. She was no longer just a healer, she was a specialized tool in Roman Kade's arsenal. The hospital's North Star hadn't moved, but the sky around it had turned pitch black. She stepped out of the car, the phone tucked deep in her scrub pocket, feeling the cold weight of it against her hip, a constant reminder that her life was no longer her own. 6 months had passed since the night the ledger of Tessa's life had been wiped clean, and in that time, she had almost convinced herself she was free. She had flourished in her residency, her hands growing surer, her mind sharper, fueled by the peace of knowing Oliver was thriving in the best care money could buy. The black flip phone lived in the back of a bedside drawer, a silent, dormant predator that she checked every morning with a mix of dread and relief. But at 3:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, the silence of her apartment was shattered by a ringtone she had never heard, a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and into her very bones. The screen didn't show a number. It only glowed with a singular, harsh light. When Tessa flipped it open, the air in the room felt suddenly thin, as if the vacuum of Roman Kade's world had finally reached out to claim her. "Tessa," the voice said. It wasn't Enzo or Victor this time. It was Roman. His voice was a jagged rasp, stripped of its usual velvety composure. "The black sedan is outside. You have 3 minutes to gather your kit." "Roman?" "What's happening?" she asked, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was already reaching for the medical bag she had kept packed and hidden in her closet, a bag filled with high-grade trauma supplies she had quietly acquired over the months. "The patient is critical," Roman replied, and for the first time, she heard a hairline fracture of emotion in his tone, a desperate, raw edge that terrified her more than his threats ever had. "It's Marco. He's been hit, and he won't make it to a public ER. If he dies, a part of me dies with him. Do not fail me, Tessa. Not tonight." The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the blood contract finally being called due. Tessa didn't hesitate. She threw on a dark jacket, grabbed her bag, and ran. The sedan was idling at the curb, a dark shadow against the sleeping suburb. As she climbed into the back, the driver, a silent, stony man she didn't recognize, hit the gas before her door was even fully shut. The city blurred past in a smear of neon and rain-slicked asphalt. Tessa gripped her medical bag, her mind racing through surgical protocols, blood loss calculations, and the terrifying reality of what critical meant in Roman's world. She wasn't going to a sterile operating theater with a team of nurses and a backup generator. She was going into the heart of the storm, where her integrity was the only thing standing between Roman Kade's brother and the morgue. The golden leash had finally tightened, pulling her into the deep end of a destiny she had signed for in blood. The sedan came to a halt beneath a nondescript warehouse on the city's industrial edge. Inside, however, the gritty exterior gave way to a high-tech medical suite that rivaled any private clinic in the state. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood and the sharp bite of ozone. On the central table lay Marco, his face a ghostly gray, his chest heaving with the shallow, ragged breaths of a man losing a race against time. Roman was already there, his coat discarded, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark ink of his tattoos. He looked at Tessa, his eyes burning with a desperate, terrifying hope. "Save him," he commanded, though it sounded more like a plea. Tessa didn't hesitate. The exhaustion of the hour vanished, replaced by the icy, clinical focus that had made her a standout in her residency. She moved with a speed that startled Roman's men, snapping on gloves and barking orders. "I need suction. Now. Someone hold pressure here. Roman, get out of my light." For a heartbeat, the room went still at the audacity of a nurse commanding a don, but Roman stepped back, his gaze never leaving her hands. For the next 3 hours, Tessa operated in a vacuum of silence, broken only by the rhythmic click of her instruments and the steady hum of the heart monitor. She navigated the jagged path of the bullet, repairing the shredded artery with a precision that bordered on the miraculous. Her hands, once shaky with paranoia, were now like steel. She wasn't just a student anymore, she was a surgeon, claiming her power in the most dangerous operating room in the city. As the first light of dawn filtered through the high, reinforced windows, the monitor's frantic beeping settled into a stable, life-affirming thrum. Marco's vitals leveled out. Tessa stepped back, her scrub stained and her body trembling with the sudden release of adrenaline. She wiped her brow with the back of a bloodied glove, looking at Roman. "He's stable. He'll live." Roman approached her, his presence no longer a threat but a profound, heavy weight of gratitude. He reached out, his large hand gripping her shoulder with a firm, lingering intensity that felt like a coronation. "You didn't just fulfill a contract tonight, Tessa. You saved my blood. You are no longer just a resource." He leaned in, his voice dropping to that low, velvety register that hinted at the dark, absolute power he wielded. "From this moment on, you are indispensable. My world is yours, and yours is mine. I always repay my debts, and I am now deeply in yours." Tessa simply nodded, too drained to speak, knowing that a debt from Roman Kade was more binding than any law. She had passed the ultimate test, and in doing so, she had traded her anonymity for a destiny she was only beginning to understand. Her journey as the Mafia's private, ghost surgeon had truly begun. What an incredible journey we've taken with Tessa and Roman. From a sterile hospital hallway to a secret, high-stakes operating room, this story explores the thin line between integrity and survival. I want to hear from you. Was Tessa right to trust Roman, or did she just jump from the frying pan into the fire? If you were Roman, would you have trusted a nurse who didn't return the wallet? What should Tessa do the next time that encrypted phone rings? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss the choices that define us when the lights go out. And also, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel as it fuels the writer to write more. See you in the next story. Bye.